Welcome to the ArcDox podcast. This podcast features discussions from leading industry professionals regarding building information modelling and digital construction. If you enjoy this podcast, or if you would like us to feature a specific topic, please let us know in the comments section of our social media platforms. You can also check out our website at www.arcdox.com for more information.
Hello and welcome back to the ArcDox podcast. This is episode number 4. I'm Ryan Ford.
I'm Pat Slattery, Director with ArcDox, and we're joined today by William Power.
My name is William Power. I'm an Associate Director at CW O'Brien Architects.
Thanks very much for coming on. We have a few questions for you, if you don't mind. Yeah. Kind of the first question that we may have is, how did you get in? What's your background first of all, and how?
Where do we go back to? I suppose my earliest work was when I was in secondary school. I worked with my dad. He was at the time it would have been steel erecting and cladding, so it was kind of all industrial work. So that was from the early age of probably 11 or 12 when I was getting dragged out or going with him. So I spent a lot of time working with him up until I left college, so I did summers and everything with him. And I suppose it stood to me in college because I had a very good understanding of how things went together. I think it's very important, I suppose, in our industry, and there's probably a lack of it, is knowing how to build things themselves. I went to college in Waterford Institute of Technology, qualified from there with a diploma in architectural technology. Went from there, then my first job was in the National Development Agency over in Dartry. So I spent 6 months there, but I suppose couldn't hack the Dublin life, being a country boy. So I went from there then to Reddy's in Kilkenny, where I spent 11 years until everything went pear-shaped. And then I suppose I spent a bit of time, went back working for my dad then. He had picked up a bit of business, luckily enough, in the downturn, and then after that back into Reddy's in Dublin, where I suppose that's where I came into the BIM sphere, if you want to say. Mainly introduced to it through Revit, and then I suppose grabbing the bull by the horns and jumping straight into it. And then more recently, after joining, I suppose, CW O'Brien Architects in there, trying to, I suppose, drive technology and digital forward.
And what percentage of your projects now would be done through BIM? Is it all of them? Or?
Well, they all have some aspects of BIM, I suppose. Doing full BIM level 2, I think even if we're all honest, there's very few projects that are full BIM level 2, but we use the vast majority of our projects are done using Revit. We have a couple of historic ones there that are for the need of it, I suppose, are done using CAD, but the starting point for all new projects is Revit in terms of delivery, and then I suppose we add in as we go in terms of what's required client side.
And are you seeing much movement on the client side in terms of the numbers who are requesting BIM or mandating BIM on projects?
I suppose not particularly mandating, apart from the public. Private guys tend to want the project delivered, so they come in, they may have heard of it, they're probably introduced to it. So we try, for those that aren't aware, we kind of explain the way we work. We try to drive, I suppose, it into where we see the efficiencies being in the delivery using digital. I suppose it's us kind of driving it on the most part, interaction and sharing.
There's obviously efficiencies for project overall if everybody uses BIM properly, but I think the first thing you have to do is find the efficiencies for yourself. Yeah, otherwise you're not going to invest or make the change unless you can see how it's going to work for your own organisation.
No, yeah, and it's getting over that hump as well when you're actually inefficient, because you obviously get inefficient for a while before you get more efficient. So it's hard sometimes because you're expecting something from someone in X amount of time, whereas initially it's going to take them a bit longer. But I think given I suppose in recent years there's a lot more graduates and stuff coming in that are already experienced. I think it's sometimes harder to find people to work in CAD now than it is to work in 3D, and it's an interesting change to 4 or 5 years ago where it was still the reverse.
It's interesting what you said there about the experience you had before going to college working on sites and on construction, because I think that's hugely valuable. And I think one of the things, we do have some fantastic graduates coming out of college, but it does take them quite a while before they understand how buildings go together properly and to get on site and see how the construction of those buildings works. Especially when you're working in a BIM environment where you're working with objects and you're working with connections between objects as opposed to drawings and 2D lines. It's really important that people do have that understanding of construction and understand how things go together properly on site.
I think it was it was a massive change coming from CAD, because you were isolated, I suppose. Like, you were working on things in isolation, so someone worked on that plan while someone might be working on the plan above them, so there was always discrepancies through that, like, or someone working on a detail and then it's not feeding back. Whereas I suppose with modelling it really is virtual building, so you have to think like you're building, and so, like, I've had this thought in my head for years, and I don't know, but I think in the first year or even before college, I think, not forced, but people should be encouraged to go work on sites and actually get their hands dirty, so to speak. I know I have a couple of friends that went through kind of social care courses, and I know most of those, before you go, you have to do a year's work experience beforehand to make sure that make sure it's for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't see why we're not doing it in other industries.
It would be hugely valuable. I'm not sure how it would work from the institution's courses, but
you could embed it into work experience or something like that.
It's only recently that I suppose we've graduates at the moment from DIT, or not graduates, but people currently doing the ArcTech course over there. So, like, they only started doing that recent enough, so it is something that's there. So even if it's a summer placement, like, it's definitely worth doing it, I think.
When I graduated in IT Carlo a few years back, and I did the architecture and technology course down there. I'm just going back to the transition between, like, CAD and Revit, and what Carlo were doing in that course is, in first year, it's a 4-year course, but in first year you use CAD, and then from second year, third year and fourth year, it's not so much that it's BIM, but they're using Revit as their authoring tool, as their design tool, so you're getting that bit of experience before you go into practice, which is very good.
It's hard. I never let tell me what to do in work, I suppose. I remember, I suppose to speak for myself here, but when I started in college, when was that, 97? It seems so short a time ago. But there was 3 computers in Waterford in the architectural technology department at that stage, and it was fairly clearly stated that they were for the third years doing their projects. So I had I suppose a new friend in there that had recently done the CAD course, so, like, he was explaining it to me, and I was going, it just seemed nuts to me to be using pencils and hand drawing. So I went off and bought a buy and sell and found I think it was an old Gateway computer for 50 quid, 50 pounds back in the day, and that was the first thing I bought, and I suppose got my version of AutoCAD and stuck it on it, and that's what I did. I did the first project down there by hand, and after that I just refused to do them. There was a bit of resistance, but in general it was it didn't seem to affect my marks, I suppose. It's good, but
I don't know what you think, but I mean, the shift from drawing boards to CAD, so it did take a while to sort of permeate right through the industry, and I think that was even an easier change than moving from CAD to BIM, because from drawing boards to CAD you're still dealing with lines and circles and arcs and those things, whereas with BIM you're dealing with walls and doors and floors and working in 3 dimensions. So I think it's a bigger change.
I suppose back in the days when people were hand drawing, they were very careful about what they did. So there was no desire to have to redraw a drawing that might take all day or even a week to complete. So, and it took so long to do it that everything was efficient. Like drawing lists were as tight as they could get. There was no over provision, I suppose. Whereas when we went to CAD, it became so easy that what was 100 drawings for a project became 1,000 drawings, because it was so easy to throw them out. Whereas I think as part of this change, I think it's kind of flipping back to that mentality as well, where you're trying to think about, okay, what's the most efficient? I think a lot of it has to do with efficiency, so it's thinking along those lines as well.
It's also an appropriate level of detail for what's required from a particular drawing. I mean, people have got used to in CAD being able to take a general arrangement drawing and zoom into the window frame and see every little bit of aluminium that makes up the window frame, which is nonsense.
There's massive dangers, because we've seen it on projects where when I was involved and started using Revit, and because it's so nice at joining walls and doing stuff like that, instances where guys actually filleted plasterboards the same way that they happened to join, because no one was giving it that much attention, whereas in firewalls, like that stopping of a plasterboard can be obviously critical to it.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting. So like I'm a big fan of detail where it's appropriate. Like, so having layers of plasterboard on a 1 to 200 plan just doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't.
So
you do your call out details and you put an appropriate level of detail in the call out details. That's the only place it needs to be.
There seems to be a bit of a desire to get everything for the building onto one sheet to make it handier for the guys to build it, but I suppose there's too little and then there's too much, and it's just finding that happy medium, I suppose, where
it's getting people to think of that when they're doing BIM modelling as well, is that, make sure that they are only modelling an appropriate level of detail for the stage you're at. People don't get caught up in putting too much detail into the model. Just what's needed.
As architects, I suppose, we're kind of struggling to let go the visual aspect of it. The chair I'm sitting on, realistically, it's a box with a size and a position, but we tend to want to see it looking like the chair when we look at it. I think if we got a drawing that was just a heap of boxes with tags on them to tell you what they were, I think it would probably be difficult to interact with them.
Well, I think when you're doing space planning, I mean, it can be just boxes that you're moving around the place, and it makes it very simple and easy to do. Well, there's no reason you can't just swap that out for something more detailed. When you need to do a presentation, when you need to get the drawings out.
There's a couple of things there that are kind of coming, AR, VR, these like the augmented stuff where you can see both. I think they're kind of exciting, because I think they'll bring this kind of full circle, I think, because I suppose once the accuracy gets tight enough that you can actually walk into a room, and instead of having to look at a drawing, you can have a headset and you can see where the chair is supposed to go, so you can actually put it down where it is. I think I've seen some stuff where guys are setting out studs with the HoloLens, and it looks very, very good. So it's,
and that's another step in the point you were making earlier of getting away from drawings and dimension drawings. I mean, if you can bring your model directly into your HoloLens or your helmet, you can avoid drawings completely.
I suppose it needs to be tested. I think obviously one of the biggest drivers for drawings is that record of what I think mostly of what was issued or happened or for the future, I suppose, really, isn't it, in case something goes wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we're nowhere near a point at where drawings are not going to be required. I think that's at least 10 years, if not a lot longer, before we get away from that, I'd say.
I think if we could move away from paper first and not having to print all these things to submit them somewhere, it's gas the amount of paper that you have to
also having good conversations between everybody who's involved in the project to ask, what drawings do you need, as opposed to these are the drawings I'm going to give you. So you actually produce appropriate set of drawings that the person finds useful.
Yes.
As opposed to giving them a set of plans, elevations and sections, because that's what you've always done.
William, just going back to the company now that you're working for, like, what are the main softwares then that you would use typically on a day-to-day basis, or your team, that would they use?
I suppose we use a lot of Revit, obviously. CAD is still there, still doing its thing like that. It'll never go. It's like a pencil, I suppose. We'll always have need for it in some shape or form. We would use a lot of Lumion. We do quite a good bit of, I suppose, animation work in terms of trying to get our proposals across. And then I suppose the nature of the industry we're in, we're very graphics orientated, so Photoshop, InDesign come into play there. And then I suppose the biggest one I would use on a day-to-day basis is probably Outlook. Back to basics. But having said that, we've moved recently into we've our own kind of common data environment, for want of a better word, so it's a project management system. So we're now putting all our documents in there and using that to manage everything, so it kind of brings everything back into one space, project finance and stuff like that. So it's good, and we use Teams a little bit as well to communicate.
Yeah,
it's we find it very good, and we start bringing in Planner and stuff like this. I was a great fan. At one stage, I think I had 6 screens on my phone for apps I was downloading, Slack and Trello and all these things, and it was a great guy for trying it, but what always frustrated me was they were all in different places.
Yeah.
So the likes of I'm loving Teams at the moment because it's bringing all of those things back together.
Yeah.
I think having stuff in one place is good.
Having one way in, it is about connecting up different applications, because different applications are good at what they do, but it's the ability to connect those together and to access them through a single point.
I think that's what's starting to happen with Revit and stuff now as well. Like, it's all those things coming into it. Like, obviously Dynamo was there for a while. It's a very powerful tool, I suppose, but it has its uses. I suppose it's getting people up to speed on it. There's probably a lot of stuff you do on a daily basis that you could probably start to automate with it and stuff like that. So it's interesting times.
I think you do have to spend a little bit of time working out scripts and working out better ways of doing things, and I think you've somehow got to justify that time that you spend for the efficiencies you'll gain by using the script, 100 times to save you, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, every time you use it.
There's powerful ones, like obviously the contractor rings you up and wants all the door numbers renumbered in his fashion. Those sort of ones, like, obviously save massive amount of time. We've used, I suppose, scripts to pull and push sheets in and out of Revit, which is very good as well. And then also just to pull information out for room data sheets and stuff like that, and kind of the text-based stuff. So I was a big fan of trying to get everything in there. So it's easy to manage it when it's in one place.
Yeah.
And then just trying to get it out. And one of the big things in battle at the moment is that change from, there's lots of talk around the industry standards, the ISOs and the BSs and stuff like that. But even, I suppose, getting people to move away from, for years, people would have templates for doing room data sheets, whereas it probably makes sense to change those slightly to fit in with the new and quicker way, instead of trying to take it out and then having to reformat it. There's probably a slightly different configuration that would work. So even getting people to change that sort of attitude can be difficult at times.
People spend an awful lot of time in Revit trying to make it look like CAD, which is fine, you can do that, but you'd question the reason behind it.
Yeah, it tends to get very heavy file size as well, difficult to manage. Something that you thought was manageable at 50-60 megabytes, all of a sudden it's hitting a gigabyte and you're trying to figure out what to do. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned over the last few years is the volume control, like actually breaking it down. I think there's a tendency to go in and hope for the best in terms of, like, we'll start now and we'll break it down later, but it gets very difficult after you've annotated 1,000 sheets and you're looking to break it down, because I suppose we've all had those.
It's a lot of additional work.
Opening the model and we need to delete 10,000 dimensions. screaming man inside your head going nuts.
In terms of the project you're working on, the information management role, I mean, is that something that you take on personally? Is this sort of project information manager?
I haven't had to do it in the last 6 or 7 months, but I suppose where I was previously, I was doing a good bit of it, trying to take it on. I think as architects, we tend to be at the front of teams, so I think that there's probably more of an onus on us to get in and drive these things. And in all fairness to them, most clients probably aren't fully up to speed, nor do they want to be. They probably want to get the expertise. And
well, I think as a lead designer on projects, like you say, you're the best placed to take on that role, certainly during the design stage.
Yes.
The contractor can take it on.
So it's driving that through. I think it's there's a little bit of explaining there just to make sure clients understand that there might be some hurdles to overcome at some stage. But I think as long as you're upfront and clear on it and honest about it, I think they tend to accept the fact that there might be a bit of pain or a little bit more time in the middle of it just to try and get a result.
And if it's thought about early enough, it can usually be worked through. But it's something I think every architect needs to be thinking about, is their role on projects in terms of information management. It's not just about producing the architectural information, it's also a role of managing all of the information that all the disciplines are producing as well, and making sure that it's been developed and managed in the right way.
I think as well, one of my pet hates at the moment is we want the models, but we want all of the drawings at every stage and 10 times in between stages as well. It's a lot of work to annotate a drawing and takes a lot of time, so those efficiencies that you're hoping for out of using these new technologies doesn't materialise because you have to put 3 guys in there annotating the planning drawings to get them ready to go in, do a tender and construction. I think that the big savings have to be where we actually stop doing that and take an object that is in a model and trust that the information that we've worked so hard to get in there is accurate and will suffice to set out what we're looking at. I think until we get there, we're still going to be in a lot of pain for a while because it just, I think most of the setbacks I've encountered is exactly that, is losing the dimensions or losing all your tags and having to redo it, or even the fact of just putting them in there to start with. Like a building that's 10 stories that's anyway chunky can take a long time to dimension and annotate.
And that should only happen at the end. I mean, all of the design development and the coordination and the exchange of information should be happening through the model.
Yes.
And yes, we'll still need drawings, but that should really be the end of a stage. When all of the decisions have been made, pretty much. And we're not going to quite get all the decisions made, but when most of the decisions are made, you then push out a set of drawings and you're fairly confident that it's not going to change too much.
It's kind of frightening in a way, though, that given that I suppose that there's a vast amount of people in the industry that can't read 2D drawings but still insist on receiving them. I think once they do start to get in and experience and interact with 3-dimensional information, I think it should change then, hopefully.
I think it works. I see it work a lot when people have easy access to the model. I mean, people think that they've got to invest heavily in order to be able to interact with the model, but there's, the model can be shared online, it can be shared through free tools, and I think once you start doing that and people have free or easy access to the information in the models, they soon begin to get it.
I think the free and easy access is, I suppose, the scary thing for a lot at the moment, because it's that if we do something wrong, they can spot it straight away, or there's no hiding, I suppose, once you start to do that. So your QA procedures become vital in terms of the checking before it goes out. There's also times, I suppose, where you're looking at a change, so like it's going to take you 3 weeks to bottom out on what it is, and I suppose in that period you're not going to want to be live sharing it either, because it'll just confuse. But yeah, no, there definitely is. I suppose it's figuring out what that is, the push and pull.
And control it, absolutely. I think it comes down to people understanding the status of a model at any particular stage. You know, that if a model is issued for comment or it's issued for review, that it's not 100% coordinated, it's not 100% complete. And I think people need to have an understanding of how complete and how, you know, what the purpose of the model is at any particular stage.
Are we fans of Kobe here?
Not necessarily fans of Kobe, but certainly Kobe is a requirement on most projects. You know, it's a requirement of the standards. You know,
I don't think I've ever delivered it. I think it's one of the ones that get lost, and I think even talking to people, the experience tends to be that once it is handed over, it's never used anyway, so it's kind of, what are you doing?
I think people get it in principle. They understand that having, you know, structured, good quality, you know, digital handover information that they can use for FM, you know, is a great idea. But I think the point is that you make is exactly it. And what we find is that the clients or the end users are not quite ready to receive that information yet, and they don't know what to do with it.
But even if they are, it always struck me as an in between. I know there's been a lot of development around it, but to me, having to go from a model into Excel to go back into something else, it just seems it's wrong, I suppose. So it's I suppose I have a bit of hesitation there in terms of I see it as an interim, and at some stage everything will start to link up, hopefully.
Yeah, what you do need is a standard coded structure for information, and a standard sort of list of parameters or information that you require about things that go into the building. How you get that information from the model to a facilities management system, whether it can be just a direct exchange, whether it's a live exchange. There's many different ways you can do that, but I do agree, you know, that the whole Excel thing in between confuses people to some extent. They look at the Kobe Excel spreadsheet and it's just columns and columns and rows of stuff that doesn't really mean an awful lot to them. So it does have to be brought into something else to make it usable.
Because even if you do, like, I suppose, unless it's hoovered in straight away, it's little good, because like even 4 months, 6 months is a long time in the life of a building. So like there has to be. I can imagine conversations going, do we take it in? But like, if we take it in, we're going to have to audit it because stuff's have to change in there. So you have to go through all of this anyway. Whereas I don't know if there was a way of interacting with the model so that they can keep. I suppose it's making it easy. Is where it needs to get to, so that people can interact. I think once it gets easy, then hopefully people will start to interact with it.
Yeah. That's another whole area of, it's great. We're good at producing information for handover. We generally produce reasonable quality, not necessarily all as built, but reasonable quality information to hand over. The owners of the building or the operators of the buildings have to understand that, as well as maintaining the physical asset, they also have to maintain the digital asset. They have to maintain the model. They have to maintain the information that goes along with it to keep it live and to keep it useful.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like I say, it just goes on a shelf and gets forgotten. But 5 years later, it's completely out of date.
You can see all the new career names there coming.
It's either an opportunity or a challenge, depending on which way you look at it.
That's for sure. There is massive opportunity there, I think, at the moment. It's just finding it.
Well, we've all seen the figures. Most of the cost of buildings are post-construction. In the 30, 40, 50 years that the building is going to be operated, and if we can improve how that part of the building's life cycle, we can save a lot of money for the clients.
Yeah.
But only if we do it right during construction and during design.
We'll wrap it up here, guys. William, thanks very much for coming in and joining us, and that was very insightful.
It's good.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.